17 times, the answer was no. 17 institutions saw a risk, not a vision. But data is a language of its own. If they wouldn't build it, he would.
The 17th rejection felt different. It wasn't the sting of failure, but the clarity of a closed door. He walked out of the glass and steel cathedral of finance, realizing that the gatekeepers were not the market. Their refusal was a data point, a specific set of parameters he had yet to solve. He stopped looking for permission. He laid the letters out. 17 no's became 17 lessons. Each stamp was a barrier to entry he needed to circumvent. He didn't see a wall. He saw a blueprint of institutional doubt. By cataloging every reason for their refusal, he was actually mapping the exact path to his own independent success. The reasons were consistent. No collateral, no established brand, no history of scale. They weren't rejecting the product, they were rejecting the person without a pedigree. He circled the word collateral in lead pencil. If he couldn't borrow the value, he would have to create it from nothing but his own labor. The notebook became his war room. He translated their reasons for denial into market requirements. If the bank wanted a history of sales, he would provide one. If they wanted proof of demand, he would find it. He was no longer a supplicant. He was an architect building a foundation on the very stones they threw. Night after night, the analysis continued. He looked for the patterns in their excuses. He realized the banks were looking in the rearview mirror while he was looking at the road ahead. He stopped trying to convince them of the future and started building the present. The transition from frustration to action was complete. He returned to his workshop. He didn't need $1 million to start. He needed the cost of raw materials for one unit. He stripped away the grand ambitions of a factory and focused on the integrity of a single object. Growth capital was a luxury, but sweat equity was a currency he had in abundance. The prototype was finished. It wasn't a concept or a pitch deck. It was a physical reality. He attached a small, hand-stamped price tag. It represented the first tangible step toward independence. The transition from a dreamer to a merchant happened in that quiet moment under the workshop light. The product was ready for the world. The first sale wasn't made in a boardroom. It was made on a sidewalk. A stranger saw the quality and reached into their pocket. $11. It was a fraction of what he had asked the banks for, but it was worth more than any loan. It was the first honest validation of his worth. He opened a new ledger. He didn't record a debt. He recorded revenue. $11. It was a humble entry, but it was written in permanent ink. This was the birth of a business that belonged to him and him alone. No interest rates, no repayment schedules, just the pure mathematics of a successful trade. Consistency became his new strategy. One sale became 10, then 50. The ledger began to fill, not with the empty promises of a business plan, but with the hard-earned reality of a growing customer base. Each line was a testament to the fact that he didn't need the bank's permission to exist in the market. The workshop was no longer a place of solitary frustration. It was a hub of production. Boxes were packed, labels were applied, and the vision that 17 banks rejected was now a thriving reality. He had built his own bridge over the chasm of their denial, one $11 sale at a time. He was the artisan of his own fate. Time became a different currency. While the world rested on weekends, the workshop hummed with a new rhythm. Every Saturday and Sunday marked in gold was a testament to a commitment the banks could not quantify. Seasonal shifts were no longer measured by quarterly reports, but by the steady evolution of craftsmanship. This was the slow, deliberate construction of a future built on sweat equity. The persistence was quiet. It did not need a boardroom or a press release. It lived in the glow of a single lamp while the rest of the street surrendered to the dark. This was the foundation of Beat 6, the realization that while the institutions were sleeping, the artisan was refining. His progress was invisible to them, but it was becoming undeniable to the market. The 10th rejection arrived with the same sterile formality as the first, but the sting had vanished. The artisan read the words, lack of collateral, insufficient history, and felt nothing but a calm detachment. He was not looking for their permission anymore. His revenue was starting to provide the only proof that actually mattered. He set the letter aside, his focus already returning to the work. The desk told a new story. On the left, the familiar pile of institutional rejections. On the right, a growing stack of paid invoices. These were the affirmations that carried weight. Each one represented a customer who saw value where the bank saw risk. Beat 7 was in full effect. The tangible validation of the market was rendering the institutional rejections entirely irrelevant. Capital was not a gift to be requested, it was a resource to be harvested. A modest cash box began to fill, coin by coin, bill by bill. This was not venture capital or a high-interest loan. It was pure, unencumbered freedom. Every dollar added was a brick in a wall of independence. He was solving the capital problem through the oldest method known, honest trade. Seasons bled into one another. The frantic energy of the early days matured into a steady, reliable pulse. The calendar pages turned, but the workshop remained a constant. This stability was not granted by a lender, it was earned through repetition. The growth was organic, rooted deep in the soil of daily discipline. He had traded the volatility of luck for the certainty of work. The bank still stood on the corner, a monument to a system he no longer needed to enter. Walking past its heavy doors, he felt no resentment, only a profound indifference. The institution that once held the power to stop his dreams now seemed small, a relic of a path he chose not to take. He walked with the stride of a man who owned his time. The 17th rejection arrived in a thick envelope, landing on the desk with a soft thud. It sat there for days, untouched. A thin, delicate layer of dust began to settle on the paper. It was a message from a world he had already left behind. The urgency was gone. The artisan was too busy fulfilling orders to care about a letter that arrived too late. When he finally opened it, the rejection felt like reading a weather report for a city he no longer lived in. He glanced at the standard phrases, "does not meet our criteria," and set it aside without a second thought. There was no pain, no anger, just the simple recognition of a closed loop. He had moved beyond the need for their approval or their money. Beat 8 was the realization that sales are the best form of financing. A simple chart on the wall tracked the progress. The line did not spike with a sudden injection of cash. It climbed steadily, a mountain built of individual transactions. This was the capital problem solved. Direct sales had bypassed the gatekeepers and put the power back into the hands of the creator. The choice had been clear. On one side was the traditional path, paved with debt and dependency. On the other was the path he had carved himself. He had sketched them out once, a mental map of his journey. By underlining the second path, he had committed to a life of self-reliance. It was the harder road, but it led to a destination he actually owned. It all came down to one fundamental shift in mindset. Instead of asking what he could do with a loan, he asked, "What can I build with what I already have?" This question, written plainly in his notes, changed everything. It transformed limitations into creative constraints. It turned a lack of resources into a surplus of ingenuity. Beat 9 was the birth of true leverage. The workshop evolved. It was not a high-tech factory, but it was more capable than ever. New tools, bought with the profits of previous work, stood ready. The aesthetic remained functional and modest, but the scale had shifted. This was the result of building with available resources. Every upgrade was a trophy of a successful sale, a physical manifestation of a business that worked. Look at these hands. They are the true collateral. They have shaped raw material into value day after day. The calluses are the record of every rejection overcome and every sale earned. Resting on a finished piece of work, they represent the culmination of grit and vision. There is a quiet pride in knowing that everything in this room was built by the person standing in it. The street remains the same, but the power dynamic has shifted. The bank still stands, cold and imposing, but across the way, a new light burns, a shop that is open, busy, and independent. He did not beat the system by fighting it. He beat the system by simply no longer needing it to exist.